Hello world, hello Barnes & Noble Book Club members. We're so happy to see you guys. I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of our podcast, Poured Over, and with me are Shannon DeVito, Director of Books for Barnes & Noble, and Jennifer Saint, the woman of the hour, who's the author of ELEKTRA and also Ariadne. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping things. There will be spoilers in this conversation. We've been dying for this moment, so just saying. There are spoilers in this conversation. Also, if you'd like to use either the Q&A module or the chat to drop new questions in, by all means, if you dropped in a question when you registered for this event, we have those. We have those already. But if you want to drop another question or you want to follow up on your question, that's great. The Q&A module is the bottom of your screen and says Q&A. You can also upvote other people's questions, which is kind of fun. And again, the chat module, I think everyone knows how to use it at this point. So we're delighted to see all of you guys. But before we get started, Shannon, I know why we picked this book for book club. But why don't you let folks here know why we picked this book for B&N's book club?
So excited to have this for the last month of May. It really, I think, caught exactly the line that we want out of book clubs. Not only is it a timeless story, but told in a new, dazzling, fantastic light. I had read Ariadne and loved it, and this just went so much further with the characters and who they were and what we get from our parents, what we inherit. And I think with the three different women's perspectives, it really was perfect fodder for discussion for book clubs. And just the dazzling sense of story throughout made it the perfect pick. So that's why I knew we needed to do it for May.
Okay, and we have a lot of questions from lots of different folks too. But before we get started, I want to talk to both Jennifer and Shannon about who you are as readers. What are you looking? I know you're both longtime, huge fans of Greek mythology and Greek histories and all. So I know that's already inbred in you guys. But what I really want to know is, who are you as readers? Are you reading for language first? Are you reading for story? Are you reading for character? What are you looking for first when you pick up a novel?
Jennifer, would you like to go first? and then I'll jump in. Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously all of those things I'm going to be looking for when I pick up a novel. I always think that my kind of really formative reading years were my teenage years, when I got really heavily into Gothic literature. And I think that really set a tone for me for what I want from books, which is, you know, incredibly beautiful, powerful language. I will always be looking for a really strong sense of, if you like, a character's interiority. I love to read first person narratives. I love to really get inside the character's head and know who they are. And I love the really passionate, emotional honesty that you get, and the power of the landscape and the environment around you. I want a book to take me to another world. I want it to transport me.
Well, as an author, you've absolutely done that. And as a reader, for me, story-wise, I think I gravitate towards the characters and the character development, because in my mind, they're real people. I know fiction is fiction, but they become real in my mind, and it usually can teach me empathy in a different way. It's funny because I also love fantasy and sci-fi and kind of the world building that can, you know, in some ways equate to story. But at the end of the day, it's whether I want to sit down and talk. If I had a chance to talk to that character, who would it be and why, and who's really kind of affected me as someone I could see myself being friends with or arguing with. You know, it's kind of those two different flip sides. Miwa, how about you?
So it depends. And I don't think we should limit world building to science fiction and fantasy. I think I mean, if you're reading Richard Yates and Revolutionary Road, that is a world. I mean, 1950s Connecticut, that is not my world. But that said, I honestly, character is usually the thing that makes me hang out a little longer. It's okay if stuff doesn't always happen, but I appreciate it when it does. Let's put it that way. And I need language, but I wouldn't say I read for language solely the way I did when I was younger, when I really just read for language. So there's a little bit of balance.
Yeah, Jennifer, you had such a good point when you talked about already how the language can influence how you see the character and how that character builds in your mind, because they are so interconnected when you're reading a piece of art. And I think it does come back to that human connection to who we see ourselves in, who we don't, and who we really connect with.
Yeah, definitely.
I have another question for you guys, though, and it's from a listener called Heather Evers. Where does your interest in Greek mythology come from?
Well, for me, when I get asked this question, I think it's, I really don't remember a time when I wasn't interested in Greek mythology. So when I was really small, my parents had friends who lived in Cyprus and they used to take us there on holiday. We were really lucky. And so actually one of my earliest memories and one of the earliest photographs of me is in this ancient amphitheatre in Kourion in Cyprus, holding a really enormous ice cream. And I think there was like a really positive association made for me between ancient history at that point. And so I just grew up loving it. I just grew up immersed in those stories, and just they've always had such a powerful hold on me. So I find it really hard to unpick now, where did it start and how did it begin? Because I feel like it is a part of me and who I am.
Okay, so you wrote the book you wanted to read, and Shannon wanted to read, and I wanted to read. But Shannon, what about you? Your background is a little different from Jennifer's.
Oh man, I wish I could have been surrounded by things like this from a young age. I was introduced really to Greek mythology and literature a lot later in life, really in college. And I didn't think about kind of the genesis of where we get stories and where we get kind of epic poetry and some of these figures that I had grown up with fairy tales, how they influence so many different cultural story collections. And then as soon as I figured that out, that so much of this really, it's all Greek. It all starts with a lot of this tradition. I just became obsessed, and I wanted the different ways you can tell it, the retellings, the characters. It's influence just cannot be understated. But I really didn't realize it until I was in college, and I had to have a professor explain it. And then once I did, I was in it for life.
Okay, so there are a lot of different variations of Jennifer. How did this book start for you? So can we go back to you sitting down and thinking, this might be the follow-up to Ariadne?
Yeah, I what made me want to write this one is I was very interested in the idea of female rage. That was something I knew that I wanted to explore in my next novel, because it's such an interesting emotion for women in particular, I think, because it's something that we so often are expected to or are taught to kind of suppress, and we are more likely to perhaps to turn it inwards upon ourselves. And there are these women who stand out in Greek mythology, who are these incredibly compelling characters, who've resonated through all of these centuries, because they weren't like that at all. These are three women who are absolutely unafraid to turn their rage outwards and to seek revenge and retribution and justice as they see it. And that made them just such interesting people for me to explore. That was my starting point with it. I wanted to immerse myself in their anger and what created it and what drove that anger and how it drove them to then behave.
Okay, so how did you decide then to bring Elektra, Cassandra, and I am hoping I'm going to say this right, Clytemnestra? Did I say that right? Okay,
Yeah.
Yay. I really did mean to practice that before we jumped on this Zoom call. But you have the entirety of the Greek mythological world and Greek history and everything else, whatever you wanted to do. Why these three?
So there are always kind of iconic moments, I think, that really stand out from Greek mythology for me, things that have really, really stuck, that I come back to over and over again. And Clytemnestra walking Iphigenia to what she believed was her wedding was one of those moments. And I knew that I wanted that to be in a novel before I had even decided on the novel. I wanted to write that scene. And quite often it does sort of start that way for me. With Ariadne, I actually started in my head with the scene where she wakes up on Naxos and she's been abandoned. So there's always this kind of one moment, one incredibly powerful moment of emotion that I I have to write it, and then I have to work out how a novel is going to then fit around it. So that was somewhere where I really started out with the novel, and bringing Cassandra into it in some ways was like a kind of a practical decision, because this story takes place against the backdrop of the Trojan War, and I wanted to tell the story of the Trojan War, but I really wanted to see it from inside the walls of Troy. I didn't want to be out on the Greek plains, on the battlefields with the men fighting. I wanted to know what it would feel like to be inside Troy. And Cassandra has got such a unique perspective of everyone in Greek mythology. To have this curse that she can see the future but will never be believed makes her, it puts her in such a terrible, paradoxical situation, and it makes her so intriguing to imagine what would it be like to live with that curse, to have everyone believe that you're mad, and what would that do to your belief about yourself. So Clytemnestra and Cassandra were women who were just so fascinating, and so just women that I couldn't resist exploring. Electra took a lot longer to come, and she did not start out as the titular character even. But when I started to kind of play with her voice and her side of the story, and imagining her as being kind of a counterpoint for Clytemnestra, she really drew me in, because she's so difficult. Whereas I found Clytemnestra and Cassandra much more accessible from a modern point of view, because these are very forthright, very angry women, with something that with a motivation that is easy to sympathize with, I think, when you really think about what they have endured and what they've been through. And Electra is she's a much tougher nut to crack in so many ways. And so working away at her and chiseling away at what makes her the kind of person she is, I found that she became, over the course of writing the novel, just the most interesting person to me, and finding out what made her tick became the quest of the novel, and so she ended up taking over.
So Samantha Flynn is wondering who had more of an influence, Sophocles or Euripides, because both of those gents wrote plays called Electra about your titular character. So is there one over the other, or did you just sort of say, well, we've got both of these points of view, but I'm going to go with mine?
Well, they both had a huge influence, and Sophocles' Electra is the epigraph of the novel, comes from Sophocles, because his rendition of Electra, she is so she's quite a bloodthirsty character in Sophocles, and she is driven to these absolute extremes of grief for her father. She's made kind of just beyond the limits of any kind of human feeling. She's such an extreme character in Sophocles, and I definitely wanted some elements of that in my Electra, because that's what makes her so fascinating. But I think that on balance, it's usually going to be Euripides who is going to have the most influence, because his female characters are so complicated and they are so nuanced. Euripides makes them so interesting to explore, and his Electra, I took a lot of elements, kind of little, it felt like a trail of breadcrumbs that he'd left that would kind of open Electra up. And the fact that he has her in his play married to this unnamed peasant who has this huge respect and affection for Electra, and so he marries her, but it's not a real marriage. He's protecting her from her mother and from Aegisthus. And he's not expecting anything of Electra. He's kind of really sacrificed himself for her. And that made me think of Electra in a different way, because she's so very dislikable in every version of her. In so many ways, she can be very, very hard. Like, she's very rigid, she's very driven, she's very single-minded, and she's so devoted to Agamemnon, who we obviously we don't share her opinion of Agamemnon, so she feels like she's coming from such a hard to understand angle. So the fact that Euripides has somebody who really cares for Electra enabled me to see her in a different way. And I expanded on that character, and I gave him a name and I brought him into her life much, much earlier, because I thought that would give us a different way to see Elektra, that we could see her through somebody else's eyes who has got sympathy for her, and that we could see that she is not she's not one-dimensional. She is not just this kind of very twisted character that she is in the plays and the tragedies, where she appears fully formed as this adult woman who is set on this quest for revenge. It just gave me a chance to see her from the start, and to see her differently, and to see her in a different kind of light. And Euripides has her as an intelligent woman, that she when she's reunited with Orestes, there's this great scene where he kind of pokes a little bit of fun at Aeschylus, who had this recognition scene based on a lock of hair that was the same between Orestes and Elektra, and he has her kind of make fun of that idea, you know. And then at the end of the play, when she's gone through with the murder, she has a moment, not exactly of remorse, but of grief for her mother. And so you can see that she is not just kind of this, she's not just an agent of vengeance, that actually she is complicated and she's conflicted and there's more to her. And those were all elements of Elektra's character that I wanted to incorporate.
And I do think that the three of them balance each other so well, because you have just the rigid violence almost of Elektra's emotions, where she just feels like she needs to react and avenge, and you know, she clearly got that from her mother who had the exact reaction when she loses Iphigenia. And I think for me, Cassandra really was one of the most interesting characters to read about in your version, because she did feel like such a modern woman. You said Clytemnestra and Cassandra, you know, they kind of fit more in a modern sensibility for modern audiences. And I think, you know, she was probably my favorite character of the three, just because you can relate to her so easily. She wasn't about to kill someone with a sword necessarily, but she can't be believed despite knowing that she's right. She is cursed to know these things and have no one pay attention to her, all because she wanted to protect herself. And I think you know, for me, I gravitated so much towards her and her experience, but I think you did a fantastic job balancing the three, because they are so viscerally different as women and represent kind of different parts of women, and also, as you said, kind of female rage, because they're all based in a different type of what female rage can be.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think my favorite character depends on when I was reading. I mean, there were moments where I was all about Cassandra, there were moments when I was all about Elektra, and there were times where I was all about Mom, whose name I'm not going to try and say again because I am being lazy. I am owning that right now. But here's a question. Jennifer, how do you pick between your children? I mean, do you have a favorite? I mean, the novel is called Elektra. You didn't name it Elektra, Cassandra, and Clytemnestra. Oh, I think I butchered that again. I'm so sorry.
No, not at all. Well, yeah, so I like you, my favorite depended on who I was writing at the time. And I think with Cassandra, she feels I mean, she's a woman with incredible insight who everybody gaslights and nobody believes. And so I feel sometimes, you know, Cassandra being a woman who speaks so much sense and is dismissed and ignored and is told that she's hysterical and that she's a mad woman. You know, I think that we can all really feel sometimes we are Cassandra, or we definitely, she's extremely relatable. And so I found probably going into her voice could have been the easiest. I was writing this novel during lockdowns in 2020. I can't remember what year anything happened. Sorry, I just had a sudden moment of thinking, what year are we in now? What's time? But I was writing it during lockdowns. I was writing it when I was homeschooling my own children. And that feeling of kind of claustrophobia and being besieged and being trapped where you are and there's a danger outside the walls, I think made her so easy to kind of step into. There was kind of a comfort in Cassandra's chapters, as tragic as they are. But there was but yeah, I couldn't pick a favorite. I absolutely love Clytemnestra as a character in Greek mythology and bringing her to life. I was intimidated to take her on at first because I so wanted to do her justice. But I felt that she deserved it so much. She's so vilified in Greek mythology. She's this kind of nightmare woman for the patriarchy. She's that everything that she does is so righteous, and it's driven by this deep maternal love. And then with Elektra, it was just so interesting to try to get into the mindset of this truly ancient woman who's driven by these ideals that are harder to get a grip on, about family honor and about religion and about kind of preserving the name of the House of Atreus, whatever her father has done. But that just made her, I so wanted to understand her. And so I think she was probably the most difficult to write, but getting her felt the most rewarding. So, sometimes I felt that she was my favorite.
So, Jennifer, what surprised you the most while you were writing Elektra? Are you one of those folks who sits down and you've got an outline, you know where the story's going, or are you sort of, seeing what happens as you go along?
Well, the outline was kind of there, with it being
Mm-hmm.
a myth that exists, and
Mm-hmm.
one, because it's taken on uniquely by all of the three Athenian tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. There really is so much story already existing, and it was so there was an outline, and I knew where it was going. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't
Mm-hmm.
know that I am somebody who could ever start writing if I didn't know where I was going to finish. I definitely need a destination in mind. But there are always so many surprising twists and turns along the way. And a big kind of twist for me was the moment where Clytemnestra and Cassandra come together, because this was something that I was surprised to learn. When Clytemnestra chooses to murder Cassandra, this has quite often been attributed to her feeling jealous of Cassandra, like sexually jealous of Cassandra, which to me seemed completely inexplicable, because she had spent 10 years planning Agamemnon's murder. There is absolutely no way that she is jealous of another woman. And I thought that Clytemnestra, being who she is and feeling the way that she does about Agamemnon, that she's driven ultimately, I said, by maternal love, that gives her compassion. That would give her compassion for Cassandra, I felt. So I kind of wrestled with what to do with that scene. And I decided, no, I am going to keep it the same, that Cassandra will die, but I wanted to really change the motivation. So I really kind of had to find another way for that to happen. It didn't
Sh-
serve kind of misogynistic.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. Shannon, though, did anything surprise you? I mean, I understand the framework that we have here, but still, this is a delightful retelling. I mean, Jennifer, you got a little subversive here. I mean, you did change the rules of engagement. So, Shannon, there had to have been something that surprised you.
I actually loved that you changed her reasoning, because it is something that I never really thought too deeply about, but had just kind of accepted as fact, as part of the kind of approach to the story and its history. But I think shifting it so that it actually cements who they are as characters even more, that Cassandra is perpetually destined, through no fault of her own, because of this curse of being able to see things, to die, because she had a hand in the death of Iphigenia. And then I think it made Clytemnestra, she was committed to avenging the death of her daughter through the entire 10 years. And to say that was because she was sexually frustrated just doesn't really speak to who she was as a character. And I think in some ways shows how, a lot of, I have obviously utmost respect for the ancient tragedians, but it didn't necessarily mean they fully understood women and their motives. they were kind of putting it as they saw how they think women would react to things. So I think that's what made it feel special and fresh. And then the approach to making Elektra more sympathetic, I think was also just surprising to me in the best way, because I had always again read her as just like, she's a nutcase. Like she just she really just she's vengeful, she's violent, she is, you know, if she were a man, she'd be the greatest war hero of all time in my mind, because she just has that personality. But I think, you know, to position her this way, and then I think with the ending, you know, where she has her own child and is trying to start this new life, but she has this entire tragedy behind her, and how she's maybe changed slightly and has just a little bit of empathy for her mother at the end, just like how they each approach death and the death scene. I think it's so you know, it's timeless, and the way that you've approached it in this kind of more with contemporary language, I think is just bringing that the timeless emotion with modern sensibilities to a whole new audience. So for me, I think it really was what I was really pleasantly surprised about with this writing style was just kind of digging into the motives of each character. It suddenly made more sense to me why they would do what they did, and not just accept it as fact because the story's been around for 2,000 years. So I knew that that's what they were going to do because that's who they are, you know.
So Alison Vosge, and I'm Alison, I hope I'm saying your last name correctly, has a question. What is your thought on Orestes' cleansing after the matricide? It seemed less arduous, which I appreciated.
Yeah, I made a lot. So I didn't give that a huge amount of space in the novel, largely because I didn't want to tell Orestes' story. I wanted it to be a female-centered retelling, and I find Electra a lot more interesting than Orestes. So I didn't include. It was a decision to stay with Electra and not follow Orestes through that whole process, because it's extremely lengthy, as it should be, I suppose. He's got a lot of cleansing to do for what to make up, to kind of purge himself of this terrible crime. So yeah, I don't. It's the third part of Aeschylus's trilogy, which follows Orestes on that journey. It also changes a little bit who Clytemnestra is, because she is, she's still consumed with vengeance. She's a vengeful ghost who is urging the Furies on to pursue her son. And that did not, again, it just didn't chime with who I felt that Clytemnestra really was. It seemed like something that didn't make any sense, that everything that she did was motivated by how much she loved her daughter. I didn't see her as a woman who was capable of turning on her son in that way, even though obviously the relationship between them was almost non-existent, even though he conspired with his sister to kill her. I never thought that was the kind of mother that she would be. I felt that she was seeking her justice, and then she wanted peace. And so I didn't want her pursuing him via the Furies, and for that to be a long, drawn-out process. I wanted to give Clytemnestra a more dignified ending, honestly.
We have a couple of questions about craft, which I'd like to toss in because I'm also keeping my eye on the clock here. But Valerie King is wondering what inspires you most during the writing process. And then I have a sort of follow-up question from, Laura, I hope I'm saying your last name correctly, Laura Havakamin, sorry. Jennifer, do you ever get scared before starting to write a book? Do you ever get an amazing idea but get scared you won't be able to turn it into the story you want it to? So can we talk about inspiration and execution?
Yeah, I mean, like a huge yes to that second question. And I'm editing my third novel now, and it's so frustrating. I think that it never feels, what this beautiful idea in your head, putting it onto the page always feels like a kind of a disappointment. And it's not. It's just that I suppose it's so easy to be very self-critical. But inspiration is a really hard thing to put my finger on. And I think if I could work out where that comes from, then I would probably feel a little bit less afraid going through the process of the execution, because it feels like a very fragile, almost like you kind of have it in your peripheral vision, and if you turn to look at it too directly, it might just disappear. So that is the kind of frightening thing, I think, that suddenly that inspiration might just float away and I might be left with nothing at all. And I think that all of that comes probably from just that critical voice in your head, which is the thing that I have to shut off in order to allow that kind of inspiration in order to actually sit down at my laptop and work, is I have to turn off the voice in my head that is telling me all the ways that it could go wrong and all the ways that it could disappoint people. And in some ways, I think I found it so much easier to write Ariadne because all the way through, I told myself nobody was ever going to read that book. I told myself it was my practice novel and I would write it and then I would put it away and then I'd write a real one after that. And if I could tell myself that every time, I think that all of that would be so much easier, because there's always, I think that fear of what somebody else will think is incredibly paralyzing and it really stifles the creativity. And so everything I do is designed to kind of shut that out and to not think about it. And so, I mean, I have lots of rituals. I always light a candle while I'm writing. I put on sounds of the ocean around me. I have like kind of little lucky objects and crystals and things, which is, you know, all quite demanding of me. But I think that possibly I do these things so that I can kind of blot everything else out in the world.
Are you a linear writer? I mean, it seems like you prefer to just keep moving forward as the story unfolds in your characters. And yes, there is a framework for these characters, folks. We understand this. But at the same time, you are still creating a world, you're creating an interpretation, you're creating these women. So are you just following them as they take you through the story? Or are you saying, I'm going to write this piece now, and then I'll write that piece later, and then I'll bring them all together and see what happens?
Yeah, I'm really linear. I can't bring myself to jump ahead and think because I would probably never go back again. If there's a scene I don't want to write, there's a reason that I don't want to write it. It's because that scene is not the right thing, or I'm not approaching it in the correct way. I think I have to work through the problem. I can't skip it and do a different bit and come back to it. For me, I really have to go through in a linear kind of chronological way. But because there were 3 narrators in this one, once I'd done that first draft, I took out each woman's chapters and put them together as a whole and read through them separately so that I could make sure each of them had an arc and had a journey and that there was some character development. So I edited it in a non-linear way, but I definitely write in a linear way.
Okay, Aileen Ruiz just dropped in a really cool question that I think we're all going to want to know the answer to. In terms of motherhood, what are your thoughts on Clytemnestra versus Medea, vis-a-vis Medea? Both women were driven by love, but that love inspired a very different action. Your thoughts?
Yeah.
It's a good question. It's a really good question.
That's a very good one.
Well, I'm so interested in motherhood. It's a really recurring theme in my writing. And motherhood in the ancient world, I think, is a really interesting thing to grapple with, because these women had really no kind of choice or control over their fertility, and then they are having children with these men who they didn't necessarily choose, and in the case of Agamemnon and Jason, turn out to be such terrible men, and there's no recourse to any kind of justice or any kind of independence. So motherhood becomes tangled up with all of these other things, because it's about it's so much about this kind of, they have so little autonomy and so little power in their lives, and when they take it, they transgress and they are vilified and they become these really villainous characters. So it's really interesting to compare Clytemnestra and Medea as 2 women who are these villainous women who come from a very understandable position in so many ways. But I do find Medea more difficult, obviously. And I think that I would find her a very hard character to take on in a novel, and I'm really interested to see how other writers take her on, because I can follow Clytemnestra all the way, and when she goes into that bathroom to murder Agamemnon, I am right by her side, and I'm kind of, you know, cheering her on, to be honest. But with Medea, there is something that kind of taboo is, it's another level, it's another step, and I find it very difficult to imagine kind of crossing over that line.
There
Okay,
was a
can I? Oh, sorry, Shannon. No,
sorry,
go
there
ahead.
was a line that stuck out to me when Clytemnestra did finally kill him. That perhaps this is what Agamemnon felt when he walked away from Iphigenia into that light of that terrible dawn. I have murdered him, and there will be no retribution. And you can kind of feel, she's like, well, after 10 years, I've done this, and now, you know, I was waiting to feel this weight lifted off of me. And it's just, everything is the same. She can't even feel relief from it. And I think the Medea question could, I mean, I don't even know how you, it would be really, really difficult to tackle from that perspective, because it's she, you know, she kind of revels in it, which is just hard to wrap your arms around it from a modern perspective.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I suppose it's where these characters become, where you remember that these are ancient characters, even like however kind of fresh and real we can make them seem. With Medea, she's taking away Jason's sons. There's something so abhorrent in a modern sensibility that perhaps might make more sense in an ancient context. Not that it would be okay in an ancient world, but perhaps that kind of mindset, perhaps you can kind of move yourself into it more easily. But definitely from a modern perspective, it's difficult.
Okay, Jennifer, can we ask what you're working on next? You said you're editing your third book now, and I'm just wondering,
Yes,
you can see the wheels turning in my head right now.
Yeah, so for my third novel, I wanted to take on a heroine in Greek mythology who is very unique, and because she is the only woman who joins Jason, who we've just kind of been talking about, and the Argonauts. So this is Atalanta. She is incredibly exciting. She's a famous huntress. She is an Argonaut. She is an incredible, kind of strong, powerful woman who is not held back by any of the things that we've just been talking about in any way.
That sounds so great. I'm really excited about
Yay.
that.
I am so excited.
I know Shannon is too. But hey, we're getting dangerously close to sort of needing to wrap things up, which is a total drag because I would like nothing more than to hang out with you women for the rest of the afternoon. But before we go, Jennifer, what did you learn writing Ariadne? What did you learn writing your first novel that got you through your second?
Well, I learned that I could write a novel from start to finish, because that was the thing that I didn't know. And I think when you've done it once, however difficult it seems, then I thought, I actually can do this. I actually can go from the beginning to the end. And I think that what you said at the very start, you said, you've written the book that you want to read. That the fact, I mean, that is exactly what I did. I wrote the books I wanted to read both times. And I think that when I saw that Ariadne had such a positive reception and that other people wanted to read it too, it just gave me the faith that if I wrote another one, then maybe people would feel the same.
Okay, and on that note, I'm going to drop a reading list for those of you who might want to do a little more reading beyond Electra and Ariadne, because I know you've already devoured both of those. I'm dropping in a little list. It does, yes, of course, include Ariadne, just in case. But there's some titles on there that you might know. There's some titles on there that you might not know. Unfortunately, the links did not transfer when I copied and pasted, so I'm apologizing for my terrible, terrible chat etiquette. But there are some very groovy books in there that you should check out. Jennifer, thank you so much. We are so excited to see what you do with Atalanta. Do we have a pub date yet? 2023? Is this what we're thinking?
Yeah.
2020? Ooh.
Spring 2023.
Okay, well, there you go. Gail Oh, Bashine, I hope I'm saying your last name well as properly as well, but she was asking when it would be published, and I knew she's not the only one who wanted to know. So thanks everyone. This was fantastic. It was so great to see you. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Jennifer. We love your books. So this is really great and really fun. Thanks everyone. Have a great time. We'll see you at the next one. Half Blown Rose has been announced. So July. Yes, July. And we have some cool picks coming after that too, you guys. For more information, you can go to bn.com and check us out. And everyone, have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks.